Hello, chess fans. Welcome to another edition of Chess Chat, a program designed to give you, the viewer, a better understanding and a deeper appreciation of the wonderful world of chess. I am your host, George Merijanian, Program Director of the Wachusett Chess Club at Fitchburg State College. This club meets every Wednesday evening in room C-188 of the McKay Campus School at the college. And with me, once again, is my trusty colleague and longtime associate, Marty Lane of Lunenburg, one of the strongest and most active chess players in North Central Massachusetts. Welcome, Marty.
Oh, George, good to see you again.
Always a pleasure seeing you, Marty. Well, Marty, today we are mourning the chess world. The worldwide chess community is mourning the passing of Grandmaster Vasily Vasilyevich Smyslov. And he was world champion. He was the 7th world champion, and he died a week ago. It was actually a week ago today. We're taping this on we're taping this on April 3rd. He died the wee hours of March 27th, 2010. And we're playing, this is a tribute to Smyslov, this program today.
Right.
And he was one of the greatest players in the history of the game.
Certainly one of the giants of chess.
What do you know about Smyslov?
Well, I mean, biographically, I don't know that much. But I would say he was a giant.
Here's a young picture. Here's of young Smyslov. Yeah.
He in the 50s, his peak years were the 50s and 60s, and in that time he had epic battles with another great Russian player, Mikhail Botvinnik.
Yes.
And he, in addition to being a tremendous over-the-board player, tournament player, top, as you say, a former world champion.
He's playing world champion Tao on the left.
Right.
Smyslov was on the right. Yes.
He was also a great theoretician, wrote several books on the endgame and on chess theory, a chess coach and teacher as well.
Now here's a photo of he's tall. He's the tallest one here. Botvinnik is on the right. Paul Curie on the second from the right, and David Bronstein second from the left. Yeah. And these are four of the top Soviet players at the time. This is taken back in the 1950s.
Right.
Here's a older photo of Smyslov. This is probably taken sometime in the late 1990s or early 2000.
Right.
He died at 89. He was 89 years old when he died. Here he is with Garry Kasparov on the right, who really admired. Kasparov had great admiration for Vasily Smyslov. And again, they were good friends. They became good friends. Now here's a rare photo of Smyslov on the right playing Bobby Fischer of the United States when Fischer was 16 years old. Right. This is 1959. This photo was taken. Yeah. And again, he played Fischer.
Was this in Belgrade? Was that?
This actually was in Belgrade, Yugoslavia. Yeah. This was a tournament they played, a interzonal tournament, or a candidates tournament was. Yeah. Right. So Smyslov had an astounding career. Here he is with his cat. Belka is the name of the cat. This is an older photo of Smyslov at his home in Moscow, and again, he died at a Moscow hospital. He was complaining of heart problems. Right. He was admitted to a clinic, and he died several days later on Saturday morning, March 27th, in Moscow. It's tragic because he had failing eyesight, he had heart problems, but he was truly one of the great chess players. Right. And as you pointed out, he became world champion. He beat the great Mikhail Botvinnik in 1957. But they had played previously.
Did they play to a draw?
Yes.
It was a tied match.
In 1954, they played to a draw. The reason that Smyslov was able to challenge Botvinnik in 1954 is that he won a candidates tournament in Zurich, Switzerland. Right. A fantastic tournament. He finished 2 points ahead of the field and earned the right to play Botvinnik in 1954. But in 1954, when he played Botvinnik, he had to gain more points than Botvinnik to gain the title.
Well, because the title holder retains the title if it's a tied
and
match.
That's what happened. Right. Botvinnik retained the title because he drew the match. Right. But in 1957, Smyslov won the match. But then he lost the title
in a rematch.
And because the Botvinnik had a rematch clause that very conveniently gave him the opportunity of getting the title back. Yeah. But Smyslov, again, he learned the game at 6. His father taught him. His father was quite a strong player.
I understand that he played
Alyekhin.
Alyekhin. Studied under Tarash, did he? Or was
No, actually, he was influenced by Tarash.
Influence, okay.
His father had an extensive chess library. Being a strong chess player himself, the father taught Vasily at the age of 6 or 6.5, and of course the curious boy would, look through the books and study the books that his father had, and actually developed into a very strong player. At the age of 14, he tied for first place in the Moscow City Championship. You take all the chess players in Moscow, put them in a tournament, and he tied for first in that tournament. And he went on to great successes. He had many tournament successes. He played in 19 U.S. Soviet championships. Did very well in those, coming in first or tying for first, and many of them. Also played, I think, 9 times in the chess Olympiads, playing for the Russian team.
And even later into his career, he was competing as a candidate for the World Championship.
Yes, he was.
Up until the 1970s.
He was always a strong competitor.
Right.
Now, the game we're presenting to our viewers today, Marty, is a game that Smyslov played in 1951 in the USSR Championship against a master, not a super strong master, but a relatively good solid master named Isaac Lipnitsky. And this is a game that's very instructive because it's going to show you the style of Smyslov. He was a positional player.
Right.
I would not classify him as a tactician, an attacking player. But of course, if the position was right for attack, he knew how to do it. And as you pointed out, he wrote books, books on chess. He contributed to opening theory. He was very imaginative in the middle game, and he excelled in the end game. In chess, you cannot become a strong chess player unless you have mastered the end game. And he was a super master of endgame. And in fact, he wrote a book, co-authored a book with Levinfish, another Russian master, on rook endgames. It was the theory of rook endgames. He excelled at that. Well, let's go to the game against Isaac Lipnitsky. And Lipnitsky had white. This is the USSR Championship, 1951. And Lipnitsky opened with d4, pawn on d2, so he plays d4. That's his opening move. And we've played that before. Right. And we're seeing this now we're going to be seeing this from Black's perspective. We're going to see this actually from Smyslov's perspective with black pieces at the bottom, so our viewers will know that, usually we have the white pieces at the bottom. This time we're going to see it from the perspective of Smyslov. All right, so what did Smyslov do now?
Okay, well, Smyslov answers with knight on g8 to f6, and this has a couple of advantages. First of all, it develops a piece. It brings a knight out. The knight that attacks the d5, e4, and g4 squares. It's a centralizing move. The beauty of it is it allows black some flexibility. It doesn't commit black to any particular follow-up. Black can play g6 after this or b6. All depends. Kind of waiting to see what white does next.
Right. Okay. So Lipnitsky now on his second move, now that he's deprived of playing his e-pawn to the center, he chooses to play his c-pawn.
Right.
So he plays c4. He plays pawn on c2 to c4.
Right.
So he might as well at least try to fight over the center.
Right. That's what this is. This is a fight over the center.
Okay.
And black has a number of options. Very common is to play the pawn again to g6 with the idea of fianchettoing the bishop to g7.
Okay, that's a good move.
And the other possibility, which is what Smyslov played, was to play the pawn on e7 to e6, which opens up a diagonal for the black squared bishop and also releases a diagonal for the queen here. And again, it's kind of a wait and see what happens here, but it opens up some diagonals, and that's it. And it also prevents any untoward pushing in the middle.
Okay, so Lipnitsky now on his third move develops a piece. He brings the knight on b1 and plays it to c3. Right. So knight c3 is his move, and with that move, with knight c3, isn't he now threatening to play e4?
Right. Now he's supporting. Now he would support the advance pawn to e4.
All right. So what does Smyslov do about this?
Well, what he does is he's going to take now that diagonal that he opened up for his dark squared bishop. He's going to use that diagonal. He's going to move his bishop to b4 and pin the knight against the king because the knight can't move, it's checked. So now he's prevented from playing e4 because the knight would simply take it.
Right. So this pin, this bishop b4, pinning the knight, prevents white from playing another center pawn by playing e4.
And positionally, we spoke about how he's a positional player. It also activates a bishop that's often kind of passive in these sorts of openings, whereas the knight is often active. And so he's now brought what's normally a passive piece into an active position.
Okay. All right. So Lipnitsky now on his fourth move has a choice of moves. You know, in this position, there's not really only one good move. There's at least a half a dozen moves that are playable. Let's show our viewers what is possible here. What white can do here, white could just actually bring out a knight. We can see knight to f3, which is a good move, developing move, that's okay. We can also play e3, which is good, opens up for the bishop to come out for placement on d3. We can also play with the queen to b3, attacking the bishop is a good move. We can also put the question to the bishop immediately, a3.
Right.
That can be done. And there's even there is even f3, which is I've seen played, and which is the idea is to follow through with e4. But what Lipnitsky played is a move which is known as the classical continuation, a classical variation. And it was favored by world champion Max Euwe of the Netherlands. Queen c2. So that was his move. Queen c2 is white's move, and that was very popular back in the 1940s and 50s, playing this queen c2 here with the idea. Well, no, he does actually prepare e4 now. Okay, so what does Smyslov do now on his?
He's got a number of choices. He's ready to castle if he wanted to.
Okay.
He could play the d7 pawn to d5, now threatening to occupy e4 with his knight if he wanted to, and preventing e4.
Okay.
He chooses, what Smyslov chooses is a developing move. He takes his other knight, the knight on b8, and plays it to c6, attacking the d4 pawn.
Okay. Well, Lipnitsky now on his fifth move is able to tally that, or play against that by playing knight f3. Knight f3 defends the pawn on d4. All right, so now what does Smyslov do now? Well,
Smyslov, he really wants to prevent e4. He doesn't really want that to happen. So what he's going to do, he takes the pawn on d7, and now he plays the pawn to d5, keeping that square open, and in a way attacking that c4 pawn.
Okay, and with the possibility anchoring that knight, bringing the knight in to anchor the knight down.
Right, the game is revolving now around the control of these squares here.
All right, so Lipnitsky now, sixth move, he plays a move which he could have played on the fourth move. He plays a3, pawn to a3, attacks the bishop. Now, he could have done that earlier to put that, what we call putting the question to the bishop. And as we see, in this position with black to move, Smyslov cannot retreat that, maintain that attack on that knight.
Right. When a piece like is threatened by a pawn, you've only got two things you can do. You can either retreat it somewhere or exchange it. If he retreats back to h5, trying to maintain that pin, he's going to be trapped in an old trap.
b4,
and then the bishop has to come back, and then
on c5,
it's lost.
The bishop will be lost.
It's such an old trap; it even goes by the nickname Noah's Ark, I think.
Yeah. Well, the beginners fall into things like that, where they find themselves, they find their pieces trapped. So on a3, Smyslov doesn't have much of a choice here.
Now he's not going to come back to where he could have been in the. That would just be a waste of time. So he's going to exchange. He's going to take the knight on c3. Okay.
And now what Lipnitsky does. Now, you'd expect him to take back with the queen to avoid the doubling of the pawns.
Well, that's the most common move in this
That's usually why the queen goes to c2 in the first place, to avoid that doubling.
Right.
But what Lipnitsky does, he plays b, the b pawn, takes on c3.
Right.
So now he has double pawns. He's actually opened up or has a semi-open b file. So that was an alternative.
Yeah, well, and the move that was played is extremely rare. It's only occurred a few times in top-level play, and this particular game is the earliest example of it that I could find.
Okay, so
Smyslov is now looking at sort of uncharted territory here. This hasn't happened before.
Okay, so what does he do?
So what he does is he plays the knight out. He could take the pawn.
Right.
He could castle. Those moves have been played later. In fact, just last year, a player castled in this position.
This is certainly playable, yeah.
But Smyslov chooses to play the knight to a5, which normally you would often think of it as being potentially a mistake.
Right.
Because you know, the saying is a knight on the rim is grim.
Right.
You know, it may get stuck out there.
Right. Usually you don't see knights moving to the side of the board.
Right.
As you say, it's grim, they're
Right.
dim to put a knight on the side of the board. Now, Lipnitsky now, he sees that the knight is attacking and threatening to win this pawn on c4.
Right.
Now, let's show our viewers what would happen. It wasn't played. What if actually the queen on c2 moved to a4, checking the king, and at the same time attacking the knight? There's only one move that black can play to save that knight, and that's playing.
He could play
c6.
c6.
It has to.
Right.
And the queen now covers, it protects that. So nothing is gained by doing an early check.
No, in fact, it would strengthen black's position.
It would, yes. It would strengthen the pawn chain, would strengthen the black's position. So in this position, what Lipnitsky did, he plays knight e5. He plays the knight e5, which now adds further protection on c4. All right, so what does Smyslov do now after knight e5?
It would look as though he could take the c4 pawn because it's attacked twice but only defended once.
Right.
But that
Shall we show what would happen if he took that?
Okay. Well, if he took with the knight, say.
Let's go through that. Knight takes c4.
Right.
He takes back. Knight takes c4.
And he'd have to take back with the pawn.
Right. And now with queen a4 now check. Whether he blocks, I assume he blocks either with a bishop or a pawn, the queen is going to recover this pawn. So now, nothing is gained.
Right, nothing would be gained
from
that.
So let's go back here, put the pawns here, the knight is still on a5. All right, so the knight is on e5, so he doesn't take this pawn, so what does Smyslov do?
Well, this is an extremely strong spot for the knight.
So what does
you know, it can just, it poses all kinds of headaches.
All right.
And so what he does is he actually sort of backs up the knight. He takes the knight on f6 and comes back to d7, threatening the knight.
Okay.
Well, not really threatening to take.
Well, he wants to eliminate. So, see if we can eliminate.
He'd much
this
rather
knight.
have a pawn there.
Well, the thing is, if he can eliminate this knight, then actually this pawn now is vulnerable.
Stands to win, right?
Okay. So what Lipnitsky does now, he could have defended that knight with a pawn, f4 or bishop f4. But instead, what he chose to do in this position is he took the knight. Knight takes d7. And what did Smyslov do?
And black recaptures with the bishop.
All right. And now Lipnitsky plays c, the c pawn takes on d5.
Right.
So we have a capture, c takes d5.
And black pretty much has to recapture.
It's the only move he has.
You know, he can't let that go, so he has to do that.
Okay. So now Lipnitsky on his 11th move plays bishop to f4. Bishop f4.
Okay.
All right. A developing move. Okay.
And so well, the queen's a little bit blocked in. What Smyslov could castle, but what he chooses to do is he takes his bishop on d7 now and plays it to b5, which, remember, this is becoming a key square now. It's control of that square becomes
Well, he has total control of that square.
Right, he wants to. He doesn't want to give up.
He's got the knight, the bishop, the pawn. They have total control of that square. Right. That is black's total control there. All right, so now what Lipnitsky does on his 12th move, he doesn't want to move his e-pawn because that would allow the exchange. He brought the exchange of bishops, and he would actually forfeit his right to castle on the king side.
And his queen side is wide open.
He doesn't want to castle queen side. So what he does, he plays h4. Now, what's this all about? H4.
Well, it's an attacking move.
Yes.
I mean, it's coming.
It signals an attack.
Right.
Okay.
And
so what does Smyslov do here?
Well, actually, what he does is he castles into the face of the attack.
Yes.
You know, he's not afraid of the attack.
He's not fazed
it's
by
really
this.
Quite cool. He just sort of says, okay, he could, if he wanted to, prepare to castle queenside.
Right.
But he goes right into the attack. He's not worried about this.
All right, so what Lipnitsky does, 13th move coming up, he plays rook on a1 to b1, and this attacks the bishop. It's undefended.
Now, Smyslov could move the bishop if he wanted.
Yes.
Back, forth. He chooses, though, to develop his queen somewhat and plays queen to d7, defending the bishop.
And isn't that a better move because
Now
it connects what we call
it
connecting
connects
the rooks.
The queen has a little bit more scope.
It allows more freedom for these rooks
Right,
now to move. Okay, so this queen,
It
instead
also-
of moving that bishop to either c4 or back, develop a new piece,
Right.
get a new piece into
Right.
play here. So after queen d7, what Lipnitsky does is continue his kingside intentions and plays rook h3, brings the rook up.
Right.
Rook h3 is his 14th move. Oh. And so what do we do now? What does
Well,
Smyslov do now?
you look at the position. He's going to continue to. He wants to, but now the king is in the center of the board. Now castling is out. The king is going to be in the center of the board.
Right.
So he's going to bring some pressure to bear, and one of the best ways to do that, he takes his rook on f8 and moves it over to e8. This is a semi-open file, right? Looking staring right down at the king.
Okay. Well, Lipnitsky continues his desire to attack here on the king side and plays the rook on h3 to g3. So rook g3 is his 15th move, and he's now on this
a lot of
file.
pressure.
Yes, he does. All right. So what does Smyslov do now?
Well, Smyslov, again, looking at this c4 square, he's got a tactical shot. He plays knight, takes this knight out on the rim and brings it in to c4, which is threatening, not only threatening to take the pawn on a3, but that would be followed by a fork on the queen and the rook.
All right. So he's threatening this fork. It's almost like what we call a family fork.
Right.
Although it's only two.
If the king was involved, it would be
You're right.
a
Family. We call a family fork. But he's threatening to win the exchange. White cannot allow this pawn to be taken with the queen and the rook staying like this because he would lose what we call the exchange.
Right.
Giving up a knight and getting a rook is a big advantage. All right. So what Lipnitsky does, Lipnitsky sees the threat of that capture, but he in turn has a counter threat, and he plays bishop h6 on his 16th move. Now he ignores this. He ignores the attack on the pawn on a3 and plays bishop h6. Now why does he play bishop h6?
Well, first of all, black can't take the bishop because that pawn is pinned by the rook.
Okay.
And any kind of a capture on that square could lead to mate or some serious problems.
Well,
it's not checkmate.
Now, see, if a beginner saw this position and a beginner would say, well, okay, I can certainly hide, think they can hide here. And if a beginner thought that they could take the knight here, attack both the queen and the rook, what White would do would just simply come down, rook takes g7 check, and now the king cannot move to h8. I mean, it would have to move to here, but it can't go here because the queen here would mate it.
Right.
So that's out of the question. So the only other move would be playing the king over here. And then we can play all kinds.
And the queen would still take the pawn, threatening to either checkmate or win the queen on the
exactly. In fact, actually, with this discovered check, it'll be mate because we'll have a double check which will end the game. All right. So this pawn is poison. A3 cannot be taken at all.
Right. So
this pawn is here. All right. So now, in response to this, the last move we saw was
the rook over.
Rook. Okay. So
now if Smyslov.
So it's Smyslov's move.
Right.
He played g6.
He played g6.
He stops the attack on g7.
Right.
All right. Okay. So now, Now this is a real threat.
Right.
Now the knight taking on a3, forking the queen and the rook are threat. So he plays the queen back to c1. Queen c1 was his 17th move. Defends the pawn on a3. All right. So now what does Smyslov do now?
Well, now the knight has served its purpose over here. He's going to bring it over more towards the center of the board. He's going to bring it back, the knight to d6. Still controlling these two.
He has full control of that c4 square. All right, so after knight d6, what Lipnitsky does on his 18th move, he plays queen f4. Queen comes into play now on the king side.
Right, there's some pressure building up here.
There is, okay. So what does Smyslov do now?
Well, Smyslov chooses an interesting looking move. Out of all the things that he has to be careful. He doesn't really want to be developing here because
the threat is actually to come in like this
and
threatening mate. And he would be required to guard against this mate against on g7. All right, so the queen is here. All right, so what does Smyslov decide to do here?
Well, he backs his bishop up to a6.
Now that's interesting. That's an interesting move.
It's not what you would expect.
You wouldn't expect that. What is he waiting for? Is he waiting? it does relieve the queen of having to defend. So it takes the pressure off. The burden, the pressure off.
You can't take the queen off the diagonal because the rook would take the bishop.
All right. So here's what Lipnitsky does after bishop a6. Now he says, okay, I now will play a3. He plays e3, I should say, e3.
Right.
He plays the pawn to e3 on his 19th move.
Okay.
Now this actually opens up the diagonal,
Right.
the white squared diagonal.
Right. And now, because he doesn't have to worry about defending the bishop,
right,
he can now move the knight, forking the rook and the bishop.
Okay. So what we have here is an attack on the rook as well as an attack on the bishop. So what Lipnitsky does here, instead of moving this rook to save it, he in turn plays bishop takes a6.
Right.
So he takes bishop takes a6 is his 20th move.
Right, and Smyslov recaptures with the pawn.
B takes a6. All right. Now Lipnitsky comes down with the rook on b1 down to b7. And look at the attack he has on the c pawn.
He's got pressure on the c pawn. He's got pressure coming this way. He's got pressure going that way. It looks
okay.
It looks grim. And your first reaction would be says, well, he should probably protect this. That would be either by
that would be a
this
first reaction. But also there's also, let's point out to our viewers why this knight, it's Black's move, why Smyslov did not take this rook, why he's not eager to take this rook.
Well, if he
took the rook, if he took knight takes g3, that would lose him the game.
Right.
Because
he could
because the queen would come down to. I'm sorry,
First he
would take here. First he would take here. Right.
Driving the queen away.
Driving the queen away, and then
come down.
And then come down with the queen takes f7 check, fault with me. All right. So yes, so he cannot take this. This rook is poisoned.
Poison, right.
All right. So in this position.
So instead of what does he do? Like he takes the rook on a8 and moves it to b8.
Now this is the move I like in this game.
Right.
Of all
it's
the moves,
the clincher.
It's the clincher. Right. This is interesting. He does not defend this pawn under attack. Instead, he challenges Lipnitsky on the open file, and what Lipnitsky does here is he snaps the pawn on c7. Rook takes c7, attacks the queen. So what does Smyslov do now?
He comes down and he Lipnitsky was probably expecting the queen to run off somewhere, and then he could finish off his attack and it would be game over.
Exactly.
Instead, Smyslov has a tremendous counter shot coming down, rook to b1, check.
Okay.
So the king has to move. There's no way to block it.
And I see only two squares that this king can go to. It can either go to d2, or, as he played in the game, he played king e2. That was only two squares he could go to. So he plays king e2 was his 23rd move. And how does now what does Smyslov do now?
He plays queen to a4, which all by itself doesn't do anything, but Lipnitsky resigned
why did he resign?
Because it's mate on the next move, no matter what happens.
So whatever he does, he cannot avoid the
Checkmate.
There's a mate in one move here.
Right. There's no way to avoid that.
In fact, he's threatening the queen to come down here.
Check.
That's check. So what if he chose to try to give himself an escape square? If he were to play this pawn up here, if he played the pawn to f3 to give him this f2 square.
Well, then the queen simply goes to c2.
And that's checkmate. So there is no escape. So this queen a4 forces the resignation of Isaac Lipnitsky. This is 1951 USSR Championship. A very celebrated game. This game appears in so many books on Smyslov, selected games. And again, it's very instructive how Smyslov violated some opening principles. He was influenced by Tarrasch. We did a program on Zygmunt Tarrasch. And Tarrasch would be horrified if he saw how Smyslov brought the knight to the side of the board, knight a5. But what Smyslov, as a positional player, knew, he understood the position and he played it accordingly. Well, chess fans, I hope you enjoyed the game that Martin and I presented to you by the great Vasily Smyslov, world champion in 1957 to 1958. He died a week ago in Moscow at the age of 89. We hope that you enjoyed the program we presented today. We'll see you next time on Chess Chat.